I never thought a weekend at a medieval festival would turn into something I'd actually remember for more than a day, let alone something that'd mess with my head. Honestly, I went with a couple of friends on a total whim, just to check out the silly costumes and overpriced turkey legs. But then I met him, and suddenly that whole weekend took a turn I didn't see coming. So picture this. Bright sun beating down, tents lined up like a colorful maze, people everywhere dressed like they just stepped out of a Game of Thrones episode. I'm wandering through, half amused, half bored, when across the field I spot this guy standing near a tent, dressed head to toe in chainmail. Not the plastic, kinda shiny costume stuff, the real deal, heavy and clinking. He's got this serious look on his face, like he's ready to joust or something, but the way he shifts his weight and watches the crowd is like he's part of some secret club no one else knows about. I'm not usually the type to just walk up to strangers, especially ones decked out like they belong to another century. But something about him, maybe it was the way his eyes caught the sunlight, or how his brow furrowed just enough when he noticed me staring, pulled me in, so I went for it. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, but probably failing. "Are you, part of the reenactment group?" He looked me over, like sizing me up, and then cracked this small smirk that made his whole face light up. "Yeah, I'm Thomas. Been doing this for a few years." "Cool," I said, suddenly feeling like I was way out of my depth. "I'm just here with friends, but I didn't expect to see someone who looks like they could actually take on a night." Thomas laughed, the kind of laugh that felt genuine, not just polite. "Well, if you want, I could show you around the behind-the-scenes stuff. Not many get to see what goes on behind the tents." I hesitated for a second, glancing back at where my friends were shouting at some guy in a leather jerkin about some sword technique. But then I thought, why not? This was already turning out to be the most interesting part of my day. "Sure," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. He nodded and led me away from the main path, past rows of tents with banners fluttering in the breeze. The sounds of the festival faded a bit, replaced by quieter noises. Hammer on anvil, low voices speaking in what I assumed was some form of Old English gibberish, and the occasional clank of armor. When we reached his tent, Thomas stopped and looked around like he was making sure no one was watching. Then, with a quick glance at me, he moved the flap aside and gestured inside. What I saw next was nothing like the crowded, noisy festival outside. It was like stepping into a whole other world. A small space filled with swords, helmets, and all kinds of medieval gear, but also something more personal. A straight piece of parchment with scribbles, a half-finished leather gauntlet, and a small, worn book sitting on a folded cloth. Thomas caught me staring and said quietly, "Most people don't get to see this part. It's not just about dressing up or fighting. It's the stories we tell, the history we keep alive." I nodded, trying to absorb it all. And then he surprised me again. He stepped closer and said, "Want to see something really cool?" Before I could answer, he reached under a wooden box and pulled out a small, intricately carved pendant shaped like a dragon. He held it up so the light caught the details, and honestly, I was hooked. Standing there, inside that dim tent with this medieval reenactor who suddenly felt a million miles away from the crowd outside, I had no idea what was about to happen next. But I knew I wanted to find out. The pendant felt heavier than I expected when Thomas handed it over, its smooth wood cool against my palm. I traced the delicate dragon scales carved into it, marveling at the craftsmanship. "This is really something. Did you make it?" He shrugged, a little shy now, but with that same spark in his eyes. "A friend of mine. She's an artisan. Everything we use has a story, you know? This one's supposed to bring courage to whoever wears it." I looked up at him, surprised by how sincere he sounded. "And you carry it around?" "Only when I'm at the festival," he said, leaning back against a wooden post, his gaze drifting toward the tent flap like he was used to sneaking away from the crowd. "It's like a little reminder. The guy the first pretend to be wouldn't hesitate to face whatever's coming. Maybe it helps me be a little braver in real life too." That caught me off guard. I'd come expecting a bit of harmless fun, maybe a few laughs about the costumes, but here was this guy, Thomas, dropping something that felt pretty real and vulnerable into the middle of my day. "So what's your story?" he asked, suddenly curious. "Why are you here at a medieval festival of all places?" I shrugged, feeling a little exposed but also willing to open up. "Honestly, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, my friends wanted to come, and I thought, why not? I figured I'd just wander around, maybe get some good pictures. But it's been kind of nice to step out of the usual routine." "You?" Thomas chuckled softly. "That's pretty much how I started, too. Just tagging along with a friend. But then I got hooked. The history, the camaraderie, the chance to be someone else for a while. It's addictive." We fell into an easy silence, the kind that doesn't feel awkward, but more like two people just getting comfortable with the moment. Outside, the festival noise was muffled, distant, like it belonged to a different world. Then, without warning, Thomas leaned in a little closer. "Want to see something else?" I blinked, heart picking up speed, not sure if this was just about medieval gear or if there was some kind of invitation I wasn't fully grasping yet. "Sure," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He reached over to a wooden crate and lifted the lid, revealing a neatly rolled up piece of chainmail and a helmet with a narrow visor. "Want to try it on? I promise, it's not as heavy as it looks." I hesitated. "I don't know if I can pull off the whole armored knight thing." Thomas grinned, that same mischievous smile that had caught me from across the festival field. "You'd be surprised. Come on, it'll be fun." Before I could overthink it, he was helping me slide on the chainmail. It was cold and a little itchy, but strangely thrilling. Then he handed me the helmet, and I lowered it over my head, the visor making my world feel smaller, muffling the sounds outside even more. When I lifted the visor, Thomas was watching me like I was some kind of prize catch, and honestly, I felt a little giddy. "You look the part," he said quietly. We stayed like that for a few moments, the sunlight filtering through the tent flap and casting shadows that made it feel like we'd stepped back in time. I could feel the weight of the armor on my shoulders and the warmth of Thomas's gaze, and suddenly the festival wasn't just a random day out anymore. Then, as if reading my thoughts, Thomas said, "You know, a lot of people come here for the show, but for some of us, it's about finding a place where we can be ourselves, even if that self is wrapped up in armor and stories from hundreds of years ago." I nodded, understanding more than I expected. "Yeah, it's kind of like therapy, right? Escape, but also connection." He smiled, a little softer this time. "Exactly." We spent the next hour talking. Well, mostly me asking questions and him telling stories about the festivals he'd been to, the people he'd met, and the small moments that made it all worth it. I learned he was a history teacher by day, which explained a lot about his passion for the reenactments. And beneath all the armor and medieval talk, there was this genuine kindness that made me want to stick around. Eventually, the sun started to dip lower, and the festival crowd began to thin out. Thomas looked at me and said, "Want to walk with me back toward the main field? There's a spot near the river that's pretty quiet." "I like going there after the day winds down," I agreed, feeling that strange mix of excitement and nerves that comes with not knowing where something might lead, but hoping it goes somewhere good. As we stepped out of the tent, the cool evening air hit my skin, and for a moment, I just looked at him. Thomas, with his chainmail still glinting faintly in the dying sunlight, his easy smile, and the way he made me feel like maybe, just maybe, there was more to this weekend than turkey legs and costumes. And as we walked side by side toward that quiet spot by the river, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the festival's clamor. The laughter and shouting faded behind us like it belonged to some other world altogether. Thomas was talking as we walked, but his voice had that calm, steady rhythm you don't really notice until the noise around you disappears. He told me about how the reenactment group was more than just weekend fun. It was like a family, a way to hold on to history, but also to find something real in the present. I realized I was smiling more than I had all weekend, and I caught myself glancing sideways at him, taking in the way the fading sunlight caught the chainmail on his shoulder. It was kind of ridiculous, this whole medieval thing. But it was also kind of perfect. We reached the riverbank, where the water moved slow and steady, reflecting the orange and pink streaks of the setting sun. Thomas kicked off his boots and rolled up his pants before stepping onto the smooth stones. I followed without thinking, the cold water sending a shock up my legs that made me laugh. "This is my favorite part of the festival," he said, sitting down on a big flat rock, "when it all winds down and it's just quiet." I sat next to him, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off his skin. For a moment, we just watched the water together, and I was surprised at how easy it felt. Not just talking to him, but sitting in silence. So, I said after a bit, "What got you into history?" "And reenacting, specifically?" Thomas sighed, looking out at the river. "It started with my granddad. He was a history buff, used to tell me stories about knights and castles when I was a kid. I guess I wanted to hold on to that, but in a way that felt alive. Reenacting lets me do that. And it's not just about the past. It's about who you want to be now." I nodded, thinking about what he said. For me, weekends were usually about forgetting or zoning out. But here, with Thomas, history felt like a thread connecting us to something bigger. He turned toward me, suddenly serious. "You ever feel like you want to escape? Like maybe the person people see isn't exactly who you want to be?" I hesitated. "Yeah, all the time." He smiled gently, and it wasn't the teasing smirk from before. It was softer, like he was sharing a secret. "This place helps with that. It's not about pretending. It's about finding parts of yourself you didn't know you had." There was something about the way he said it that hit me harder than I expected. I looked away for a second at the water swirling around the stones before meeting his gaze again. "So what about you? What parts of yourself have you found here?" I asked. He shrugged, then chuckled quietly. "Maybe the part that isn't afraid to be seen, even if it's just in chainmail." I laughed, and the sound felt lighter than it had been all day. I guess that makes two of us. We sat there for a while longer, talking about everything and nothing. The sun slipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to twinkle overhead. I felt a sudden, unexpected calm settle over me. Then Thomas did something that made my heart skip. A small, easy touch on my arm. "You want to stay a little longer? I mean, if you're not ready to go back to the noise just yet." I nodded, and we settled back, side by side, watching the river flow under the moonlight. There wasn't any rush, no pressure, just two people in a quiet moment that somehow felt a little like the start of something. And I couldn't stop thinking about how strange and perfect it was, how a medieval festival, a stranger in armor, and a riverbank at dusk had come together to make me feel something real for the first time in a long time. The moment stretched between us, quiet except for the gentle burble of the river and the occasional rustle of leaves in the night breeze. I caught my breath, realizing how unusually calm I felt. Usually, when I met someone new, especially someone cute, there was this jittery mess of nerves and stupid jokes. But with Thomas, it was different. Like the kind of calm you get when you know you're exactly where you're supposed to be. After a while, he glanced at me, eyes reflecting the soft moonlight. "I don't usually open up this much on the first night, you know." I laughed, the sound breaking the stillness just enough to feel comfortable. "Neither do I, but I'm glad you did." He smirked, then waved a hand toward the festival in the distance, where faint sounds of music and laughter still drifted on the breeze. "It's weird, right? We're out here, away from all that, and it feels more real." I nodded. "Maybe because no one expects us to be anything but ourselves out here. No screens, no fake smiles, no trying to impress." He looked thoughtful for a moment. "Yeah, you don't have to put on armor to protect yourself." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of that. "Sometimes, I wish I could put on actual armor in real life." Thomas laughed softly. "Maybe you don't need armor. Maybe you just need the right person standing beside you." My heart thudded in a way that wasn't just from the cool night air. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, without the distractions of the festival or the clinking chainmail. He was more than the reenactor, more than the medieval night act. He was just Thomas. Warm, genuine, and somehow magnetic. I felt bold enough to reach out, brushing my fingers against his arm. He didn't pull away. Instead, he shifted closer, our shoulders touching lightly. That contact sent a ripple through me, a mix of excitement and something softer, something deeper. "So," I said, trying to keep it casual but failing miserably, "do you ever get tired of wearing all that armor? I mean, physically, it looks exhausting." He grinned, the same sly smile that had drawn me in earlier. "More than you'd think. But the armor's part of the story. It reminds me who I'm trying to be. Sometimes it's easier to be brave when you feel like a knight. I nodded, understanding more than he probably realized. Maybe we all have our own armor, right? Some visible, some not. Exactly. He looked down at his hands, then back up at me, eyes shining in the moonlight. And sometimes you let someone see the parts under the armor. There was something tender in his voice that made my chest tighten. I wanted to say something that sounded less like nervous rambling and more like what I felt, but the words got stuck. Instead, I just smiled and said, "Maybe tonight's the night to try that." Thomas's smile deepened, and he shifted a little closer, enough that I could feel his breath on my cheek. Maybe it is. For a few moments, we just sat there, letting the silence speak. The river's soft murmur, the stars overhead, and the warmth between us made the world feel smaller and somehow kinder. Then, just as I was about to say something that might have ruined the moment with my usual awkwardness, Thomas leaned in and kissed me. It was gentle, like a question and an answer all at once. I felt like I'd been holding my breath for years and finally could exhale. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine and whispered, "I'm glad you came over." "Me too," I said honestly, heart pounding and feeling more alive than I had in a long time. We stayed by the river a little longer, talking softly, sharing stories and making plans to see each other again. The festival would end tomorrow, but in that quiet riverside moment, it felt like something new was just beginning. Walking back toward the tents later, I realized I'd stumbled into something unexpected. Not just a random weekend distraction, but maybe the start of something worth holding on to. And honestly, I couldn't wait to see where it would go. The next morning, the festival buzzed back to life, louder and more chaotic than the quiet riverbank we'd left behind. I was still riding that high from last night, but there was this knot of nervousness too. Like, what now? Did we pretend nothing happened? Or was this real? I found Thomas near his tent, already dressed in his chainmail, adjusting a leather strap with that familiar focused look. When our eyes met, he smiled that same shy, genuine smile, and suddenly all my questions felt a little less scary. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual but probably failing. "Morning," he replied, voice low but warm. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in a while," I admitted. He nodded, like he knew exactly what I meant. Then he gestured toward the festival grounds. "Want to stick around today? Maybe watch some of the competitions? There's a sword fighting demonstration this afternoon. I'm part of the team." I hesitated only a second before nodding. "Yeah, I'd like that." We walked through the bustling crowd together, and I couldn't help but notice how Thomas seemed in his element. Easy, confident, weaving through the chaos like he belonged. People greeted him like an old friend, and for the first time, I saw this whole world through his eyes. Not just costumes and games, but a community. As we settled on the grass near the arena, I watched him suit up with the others. Helmet, gauntlets, the works. His movements were precise but relaxed, like a dance he'd practiced 1,000 times. When the demonstration started, the clang of swords echoed over the field, and Thomas fought with a mix of skill and passion that took my breath away. After the crowd cheered, he jogged over to me, cheeks flushed from the exertion. "What did you think?" I grinned. "Honestly, you make a knight look pretty badass." He laughed, the sound easy and real. "Glad you think so. But there's more to it than just the fight. It's about trust, teamwork, and maybe a little showmanship." I nodded, intrigued by how much I was learning, not just about medieval combat, but about Thomas himself. As the day wore on, we wandered through the festival together, sharing turkey legs, watching performers, and talking about everything from history to music to the little things that made us who we are. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected, and Thomas listened like each word mattered. Later, we found a quiet spot behind the main stage, away from the crowds. Thomas sat close, his shoulder brushing mine. "I was thinking," he said hesitantly, "if you want, you could come to one of our regular meetups. It's not just festivals. We get together, practice, hang out. It's where I really feel at home." I looked at him, heart pounding. "I'd like that. A lot." He smiled, That slow, genuine smile that made me forget how nervous I was. Good, because I'd like to get to know you, beyond just the festival. The day ended with us watching the sunset from a hill overlooking the grounds, the sky painted in shades of pink and purple. Thomas took my hand, tentatively, like he wasn't sure if I'd pull away. But I didn't. I held on. In that moment, surrounded by fading light and the distant hum of the festival, I realized something. This wasn't just a summer fling or an adventure. It was the start of something real, messy, and maybe a little scary. But I was ready to see where it went. Because sometimes, the best stories don't come from history books or grand battles. They come from moments like this. Unexpected, imperfect, and entirely ours. After that weekend, I kept thinking about Thomas, and not just the way he looked in armor or the way his laughter stuck with me. It was deeper than that. There was something about how easy it was to be with him, like I wasn't performing or hiding behind some carefully crafted version of myself. It was raw and real, and honestly, kinda terrifying. A few days later, he texted me out of the blue. "Hey, we're meeting up at the park tomorrow with the crew. Wanna come?" I stared at the message for longer than I cared to admit before typing back, "Yeah, I want to." The next evening, I found myself standing near the park's entrance, heart pounding like it was the first day of school again. But then I saw him. Thomas, casual without the armor, just jeans and worn jacket, his smile easy and inviting. The whole reenactment group was there, laughing and talking like a close-knit family, and for the first time I felt like I was about to be a part of something. He pulled me aside, away from the chatter. "You nervous?" "Terrified," I admitted. He laughed softly. "Don't be. You don't have to know all the history or sword skills. Just be you." That was easier said than done, but I tried. We spent the evening watching the others spar and joke, the cool air filled with the sounds of clashing swords and friendly banter. Thomas showed me a few basic moves, patient and encouraging. And even when I stumbled over the simplest footwork, he never made me feel foolish. At one point, we took a break, sitting on the grass under a big old oak. He looked over at me, eyes searching. "So, what brought you here?" "Really?" I hesitated. Opening up wasn't my forte, but with Thomas, it felt different. I guess I was tired of feeling like I was stuck, like I was watching life from the sidelines instead of living it. He nodded, like he understood more than I was saying. I get that. The armor helped me too. Not just the metal, but the idea of being braver, more honest with myself. For a second, the world shrank to just us. The cool grass beneath, the fading light, and the quiet hum of the park around us. Then Thomas reached out, taking my hand in his. The touch was electric and grounding all at once. "You don't have to wear armor here. You can just be you." I squeezed his hand, a smile creeping onto my face. Maybe that's the best armor of all. As the evening turned to night, we stayed close, talking about dreams, regrets, and all the things we usually hide. I realized this wasn't just a fling or a passing fancy. It was something I wanted to hold on to, something worth fighting for. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Thomas and I kept seeing each other, sneaking away from work and obligations to meet up, sometimes at the reenactment group, sometimes just in quiet corners of the city. Each time I learned a little more about him, the way he loved old books, the soft vulnerability beneath his tough exterior, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about teaching. And I started to feel brave too. Brave enough to hope, to dream, to imagine a future that wasn't lonely or confusing. One night, after a late dinner at a tiny cafe tucked away from the noise, Thomas looked at me, serious, vulnerable, and said, "I don't want this to be just a summer thing." My heart hammered in my chest. Neither do I. He smiled, that slow, genuine smile that had stolen my breath from the start. "Then let's make it something real." I reached out, pulling him close. "I'm all in." We kissed under the soft glow of the street lamp, the world falling away until there was only us. Two guys who found something unexpected in chainmail and quiet moments. ready to take whatever came next together. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared. I was hopeful. Because sometimes, the best stories don't come from castles or battles. They come from two people daring to be real with each other, one day at a time. Months passed, and what started as a chance meeting at a medieval festival slowly blossomed into something steady and real. Thomas and I found our rhythm, not just in the reenactment world, but in life. The armor came off more often than it went on, and what remained was just two guys figuring out how to be together without the distractions or pretenses. One chilly evening, we met at that same river spot where everything had shifted that first night. The sky was clear, studded with stars, and the water reflected the calm of the night. We sat on the rocks, side by side, shoulders brushing, sharing a thermos of coffee to ward off the cold. "I never imagined I'd find this," Thomas said quietly, breaking the silence. "Me neither," I admitted, looking out at the gentle current. "Not just the festival, but you, this." He smiled and reached for my hand, fingers lacing with mine as naturally as breathing. "I think sometimes life surprises you in the best ways, when you stop trying so hard to control everything." I squeezed his hand, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. "Yeah, like the best armor is the one you don't need." We sat like that for a while, simply being no roles, no histories, just the two of us. The world felt quiet, safe. Later, when the festival rolled around again, we went back, not as strangers, but as a couple who knew each other's stories, fears, and dreams. We walked through the crowds hand in hand, no longer just observers, but participants in a shared story we were writing together. Looking back, I realized that weekend wasn't just a detour from my routine. It was a turning point. Meeting Thomas taught me about courage, not the kind forged in metal and battle, but the kind that comes from showing up, being vulnerable, and choosing connection even when it's scary. And maybe that's the real magic of it all, finding someone who makes you feel brave enough to be yourself, no armor needed.